Hey everyone, Brian Safchik here. So today we're going to talk about what happens when you submit your application directly to a company for a role that you're a perfect fit for and no one ever contacts you. So what happens, how your resume kind of goes into what I call the black hole, and then how do you get out of that? How do you get your resume out of it, right? What can you do? So first of all, before I even start this, I want to just say that this does not happen with every company. There are some companies out there who are really, really good at hiring. There are companies that I'm trying to get into for years who don't need me, and frankly do a great job of hiring. So, if you're a company, if you don't need to go pay a search firm and you can hire good people on your own, then why would you, right? So there are some really, really good companies at hiring, and there's also some really, really strong talent acquisition people at companies, even at companies that aren't very good at hiring. So this is not going to be an indictment on talent acquisition. I'm just trying to walk you through what happens and why you have not been called for on these types of positions. So this stuff happens all of the time. All right, and I have candidates, talk to me all the time about this. That they submit a resume and they're a perfect fit for a role, but then I see it on my end, right? Because companies will hire me to run a search for them, and I will stumble upon a candidate through my headhunting, and that candidate had already submitted themselves for that job, and that they're the perfect fit for the role, and no one ever called them. So. This stuff does happen, unfortunately, quite often. And let me explain to you why. It's not because, the talent acquisition person who's handling the search is incompetent, right? That's not the case. It's generally because most companies are just not set up properly to handle the volume of jobs and the volume of resumes that they get for their different positions, right? So, for instance, let's say you were to a large company, and this happens very much in large companies. They get volumes of resumes, right? If you're a very well-known company, let's say you put, I do a lot of supply chain. Let's say you put a director of supply chain out there at a very large company. They're probably going to get over 100 applications. And what happens there is on those applications, out of 100 resumes, probably only 5 are the right fit for what they're looking for, that they have the industry experience, that they have the exact type of experience they're looking for, and everything else falls into play. The reason why I don't advertise any positions is the hit rate on these things is extremely low. So, for me to sift through 95 wrong resumes to find 5 good ones is not really worth my time. It takes a long time. Now, think about that multiplied by 20 jobs, because a lot of talent acquisition people that I speak to, they're working on 20 plus jobs, 15, 20 plus. I actually had one of my better talent acquisition people that I spoke with last year. I remember December, she told me, Brian, I have 34 open recs. 34. So imagine trying to take that type of volume with 34 open positions and how many resumes you have to go through just to find a couple of good resumes. It's an insane amount of work, right? And then on top of that, most companies don't have their talent acquisition team structured to where, the people who work there are specialized in any one area, right? They're handling jobs that are all over the map. So it's really difficult for that person to really understand, the difference between, how to decipher, a resume that's really good for supply chain versus, accounting and finance versus quality assurance versus all of these different areas. They're not specialists in this area. So what ends up happening is if the resume is even remotely close, they'll then, because they don't want to miss out on something, they'll send a whole bunch of these resumes to a hiring manager, right? So the hiring manager will sit there and they'll all of a sudden get 30 resumes from talent acquisition to sift through. And frankly, they don't really have time to do that. They have pretty busy jobs, right? They have other things going on that are more business critical than going through these resumes. And so if they start going through 30 resumes and realizing that maybe 1 out of 10, if that, are okay, and they're still not 100% right, they start to get frustrated, and then maybe they'll go through the first batch, but the second batch they don't go through as much. Now understand, it's not just these jobs that talent acquisition has to work on. They also have other responsibilities, right? They have to screen candidates, they have to set up interviews, they have to do offer letters, they have to onboard people a lot of the times, depending on how big the company is. Sometimes they are able to hand that work off to other people, but at some of the smaller companies, while they may not get the same volume of resumes as the big companies do, their departments are not as big, so they're more involved with scheduling and offer letters and things like that, whereas maybe the big companies, they can hand that off to someone else. But it just becomes really difficult. So think about it, right? You have a hiring manager, you get 100 resumes for a search. Talent acquisition is almost too busy to go through them all. They send a whole bunch to the hiring manager. Hiring manager starts to get frustrated, and that's the situation that we're in. And eventually, they'll put this out to a search firm, right? So at that point, let's say I get a search, and my client has already been looking for a month already for this search, right? And on the search, and they've exhausted whatever resumes they think they've gotten or whatever it is, right? Then they give me the search, and I start doing search work. At that point, they're sort of moving on to other things, right? If you're sitting there with 20 jobs and you've given it to a search firm, and now you're giving it to the search firm to handle, right? You're kind of not going to look at anything new that's coming in because you're too busy, right? So, I think what ends up happening is they give me the search, and then they really kind of give up on it and just rely on me to fill the role. So if you have then submitted your resume to a company and it's been given, and the role and the position's been given to a search firm, it's probably not getting looked at, given the amazing volume of resumes that are coming in, right? So that's sort of what happens. And here's the bigger problem, right? If you've submitted yourself for a position at a company and they've given me the role to work on, and I happen to contact you and you've already submitted yourself for that role, they're not going to let me work with you. They're going to tell me that I am not paying you for a resume that we already have, right? So it's sort of a really bad situation that you get yourself into. And unfortunately, this has happened so many times where I stumble upon a candidate who had already submitted themselves for that exact same position, is the perfect fit, had never been called, yet I can't represent that candidate, so everyone loses, right? I lose because I can't represent the candidate. I'm certainly not going to tell my client about it because I'm not going to get paid off it. All I've done is create extra competition for myself for a job that I want to get paid on, right? The candidate loses and the company, everyone loses in that situation. So it is really unfortunate, and this stuff happens, and that's why your resume is not being looked at. It's not because people are incompetent. It's just that these talent acquisition departments at companies who aren't terrific at hiring are just overworked, right? So what do you do? Right? What do you do? There's no way for you to know that a search firm is working on this search and now that you should be contacting. As a candidate, what do you do? So my advice to you is a few things. One, I would get myself very aligned with recruiters who specialize in whatever industry that you're in, right? Or so if I do, for instance, I do supply chain in the pharmaceutical industry, supply chain and quality assurance in the pharmaceutical industry. If whatever specialization you're in, if you're contacted by a recruiter, even if you're not interested in that job, right? you should align yourself to, if you see that that recruiter is in your area of specialization, get yourself aligned with someone. Get them, make sure that that you have developed some relationships. Because if you see a job posted by a really big company, you may want to go out to the recruiters and say, are you working on that role? Or do you know people there that you can put me in touch with? You can go that route. If you look at job descriptions, right? If you look at a job description, a lot of times that job description will say that this role reports to the executive director of blah, 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 or whoever, right? They'll give you the title of the person. Go on LinkedIn and see if you can figure out who that person is. And then what you can do is, and if you go back to a few videos I've done, I did a video before. If you go into my profile and you see some past videos, I did a video on how you can figure out the email addresses of people who the business email addresses of people who work at these companies. You can figure out the email address and shoot an email over to that hiring manager or talent acquisition, or both. So shoot an email to the hiring manager and talent acquisition, and don't make it so formal. You don't have to include a cover letter or anything like that. Just say, hey, look, I've submitted myself for this role. I'm not sure if anybody looked at the resume. I think it looks like I'd be a really good fit for it. Here's my resume. I'd love you to make sure that someone's looking at it, right? You can do something like that. It's totally viable. It doesn't make you look desperate. Don't make that, and that's why I'm saying don't make the email so official, right? It's more of like, hey, FYI, I wanted to reach out to you, introduce myself. I submitted myself for this role. I've had some bad experiences with submitting my resume directly to companies. I'm not sure if anyone's really been looking at these things or not. Here's my resume, and someone who's the head of talent acquisition is probably not working on that role, but would definitely forward that along to the appropriate person who is, right? So I would do that. And look, if you see a job posted on LinkedIn, a lot of times the person at the company, the talent acquisition person at the company who's working on that role, is listed on that job. So instead of just applying, maybe you can shoot a message over to that person directly and give them a heads up about that, right? So that's my advice for you. That's how kind of all of this goes on. That's how your resume goes into the black hole. It is very unfortunate, but I don't really see much of a fix. A lot of companies are using these RPOs and are outsourcing the talent acquisition piece, or at least the resume sourcing piece. But you run into the same issue with some of the RPOs, is that a lot of them are not specialists, and they're not really sure what to look for. And unfortunately, while they probably do a better job of managing the volume of resumes, they still end up sending the hiring manager a whole bunch of resumes at one time, and unfortunately, busy hiring managers don't want that. So that's the advice for today. I just wanted to kind of walk you guys through this. I get asked this all the time. I hope it was helpful. Share the video if you think it is, and I'll see you guys soon.